So we will start tonight's. John's all ready for the pledge.
We're gonna wait
All
a
right,
while.
go ahead. We'll
Make
do
a
the
motion
pledge.
to
Come on.
adjourn.
And then we'll introduce. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Nice shirt you got.
All right. It's 6:30 p.m. and today's Tuesday, February 4th, 2020. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Marquette Township Board. Already done the pledge. If you want to do roll call, Randy, that would be great.
Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Marks.
Present.
Trustee Everson.
Here?
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Treasurer Johnson.
Here.
Clerk Ratar is here, and Supervisor Durant.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard and our legal counsel Roger Zappa.
Great, thank you. I'll apologize now for my voice. We'll see how long it lasts.
Want a minute?
No, that'll probably make it worse, thanks. Public comment, you're already on the agenda, unless Lisa wants to say something. No? Okay. And no board member comment then. So tonight's consent agenda consists of approval of special meeting minutes of January 20th, 2020, and regular board meeting minutes of January 21st. Bills payable in the amount of $304,973.20. Received committee and other reports includes road committee agenda for February 4th and minutes of December 3rd, 2019. Iron Ore Heritage Recreation Authority 2020 meeting schedule, utility billing calendar from February, and SEMCO is asking for an increase. We don't have any action on that. Excuse me, case number U-20551. Anything anybody wants to pull out of the consent agenda?
And just a comment when you get through.
Yeah, I move to accept the consent agenda. as
I'll
presented.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You want to comment now?
Yeah, on the SIPCO Energy notice, we sent a letter last time with our opposition to it. Do we want to do the same thing again? How much it does, who knows?
Do you have any thoughts?
We're already on record opposing it.
Okay, keep going. Okay. Unless there's something to change, we need approval of the rest of the agenda.
So moved as presented.
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I don't have any conflicts that I'm aware of. So our next up is Board Education Privilege Comment, Tara Langham from MERS, Michigan Employment Retirement, Michigan Employees Retirement. Thank you.
Municipal Employees Retirement
Municipal,
System.
okay.
Which includes cities.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight. As Randy indicated, my name is Tara Langham. I'm the regional manager for MERS. And Randy had asked for me to attend this evening to just answer some questions regarding, your overall defined benefit plan and options for adding a defined contribution plan. So I want to just start off by saying the current defined benefit plan that you have is at the end of 2018 at 78% funded, which is fairly in line with the majority of our communities in MERS. And you have been making progress over time. These pension plans are designed to get themselves back to 100% funded over a 20-year period of time. I do have some information for you in terms of a packet, but really wanted to just leave this more open for you to ask questions. Randy did want me to speak to the fact that, talking about adding a defined contribution plan to the township and what type of impact that would have to your defined benefit plan that you currently have. And so there's a couple options. If you're looking to just add a defined contribution plan alongside the current defined benefit plan that you offer your employees, you can do that. and it would have no impact to the current defined benefit plan that you have. So let's say you were looking to hire a specific position and you wanted that specific position to be covered under defined contribution instead of defined benefit, you could do that. And it would, again, have no impact to the current plan. Now, if you were to say, okay, we want all new hires coming in to go into defined contribution and not defined benefit, then there would be an impact to that closed defined benefit plan. But if it's just looking at, one position coming in to add that, then your current plan would stay on the path that it currently is, and you would have a defined contribution plan alongside of that. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on that?
I think we have lots of questions.
Okay, good. Well, that's why I'm here. So please feel free. Go ahead
Go
to
ahead,
ask
Dave, you can
questions.
start.
I guess I'm wondering, if you had a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan, and if you made the defined contribution plan available to the balance of the employees so they could elect to do that instead of the defined benefit, am I right in assuming that they would, if so long as they were vested already, they would remain in the defined benefit, and when they retired, they would collect from that as well as the defined contribution, which is theirs? The township wouldn't have any more responsibility in the defined contribution, but there would be a responsibility in the defined benefit.
Correct. So you're asking, just let me make sure I have the question clarified. If your current active employees who are on defined benefit could have the choice to go to defined contribution, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So you can do that. However, the township would have to be funded at 80% or above in order to allow your employees who are currently in defined benefit to convert their time to defined contribution moving forward. So if you were doing a conversion, that would be the process. If the township said, you know what, we want to stop defined benefit altogether, you can freeze your defined benefit plan, and then moving forward, all of your employees would be in defined contribution. So that's two different scenarios. One, you're giving them the option to convert. Two, you're saying, nope, we're stopping the defined benefit plan. All of your defined benefit time is frozen, and then moving forward from X date, you will have defined contribution.
Okay,
So
yeah.
two different
I guess
situations.
my question is, do they get the option under that scenario, or, in other words, they get the option to freeze their defined benefit and begin under the defined contribution, at which point their defined benefit is frozen, and when they retire, they start drawing on that as well as a defined contribution, correct?
You can give them the option. So under scenario one, like I explained, if the township is 80% funded or above, which you're not as of the end of 2018, if you were, you could say, we're closing the defined benefit plan out. We're going to defined contribution for all new hires and offering your existing employees conversion. Then yes, what we would do is what's called a present value of accrued benefit statement for those employees who are currently here. They would sit down with our benefit education specialist, Tammy, and then they would go through the process of whether or not that's something that's their choice.
Are you talking about, in what you're discussing right now, or you're talking about converting their defined benefit into a defined contribution?
Correct.
Do they have to do that, or can they freeze the defined benefit and then begin taking part in the defined contribution?
So if you do the second option, the defined benefit freeze, then you would be forcing them to go into defined contribution. If you were offering them conversion, they would be converting their full value of their defined benefit plan into a defined contribution. So they don't have the option to freeze it and then start defined contribution going forward, like under a conversion scenario. You could force them to do that, but that's not an option.
It sounds like that would be for our whole plan, not individually.
Right, at a division level. Yeah, so if you met the requirements of the 80% and you wanted to offer conversion for your existing employees, then that would be their choice. They could convert their time into defined contribution going forward. If you said, okay, as a township, we want to stop defined benefit altogether and move to defined contribution for all new, new hires and your existing, then their defined benefit time would freeze and defined contribution would be their plan going forward. So two different situations. One's a conversion of their time and the other is we're freezing your time and going forward. But they don't have that option.
So there's not an individual employee option to freeze their defined benefit and go into defined contribution?
Correct. If you do scenario 2, you're going to do that at a division level, and you would freeze that plan and go forward.
Okay.
Yeah,
Everyone would have to do it.
in that division, yes. Yep.
Good. John?
On that, if somebody, well, I guess either one of those that you proposed, that you didn't propose them, that you were talked about.
Yeah.
If somebody was to go into, let's say we wanted to have, change it for everybody. How does that, how are they impacted by the 10-year requirement?
So if their time would continue on, whether you change plans in either scenario under a conversion or a freeze, their time, like if I had been here for 7 years and, moved to a defined contribution moving forward, my 7 years would still count towards my vesting on my new plan.
Okay.
So they wouldn't lose that
Okay,
time. That's a
thank you.
great question. Yeah.
Randy?
So Tara, if I understand this right, so we have an individual requesting a defined contribution option.
Yes.
So to do that, all you'd have to do is a resolution and some paperwork. There would be no additional cost for the township beyond that?
No, so that's a good question, Randy, and Randy did fill me in on this situation as well. So in that case, if you have one individual who wants the defined contribution plan for certain reasons, then you would bring in defined contribution alongside your defined benefit. We would put the parameters around the adoption agreement of that defined contribution division, and then it would be just for that person in that division. Nobody else in the defined benefit plan would be affected. And yes, it's just a simple resolution and adoption by the board as a new plan. That person would go in, and then if in the future a new township manager came in and didn't want to be in defined contribution, wanted to be in the current defined benefit plan, we could do that. We can accommodate that.
And then in your experience, looking at both plans,
Yeah.
would defined contribution would probably, in the long run of the township, be a cheaper plan because there's actually no legacy cost after they're gone, right?
Well, we get this question a lot. The majority, I manage over 120 groups here in the UP. The majority of our plans are still defined benefit plans. It depends, when you look at defined benefit versus defined contribution, there's many questions that we ask when we sit down as to why you're looking at the options. And oftentimes, people think defined contribution is cheaper. But it depends. It depends on, how well the plan is managed. It depends on what type of contribution you are going to put into the defined contribution plan. So to give you an example, I ran some normal cost calculations for a city, and they came back at like 3.5% normal cost. So for me as a new employee hiring into a lower defined benefit plan, still defined benefit, just a lesser set of provisions, the cost for that particular city was like 3.5% for defined benefit. When I asked them, well, what would you put into defined contribution, knowing that the average is 7 to 10% on an employer contribution, it made more sense to them to stick with defined benefit because it was cheaper. Now, where we're at right now is that a lot of our communities have legacy debt. So over the past, many, many years since these plan came into MERS, there's been a lot of benefit improvements that were given that weren't pre-funded. There's been a lot of new assumption changes that have made these defined benefit plans become more expensive for that legacy debt. But when you're comparing apples to apples, you're looking at normal cost. That's me as an employee to accrue a year of service versus the cost of the defined contribution plan. Another piece that I always point out when groups are looking at it is the investment side. So when you shift risk, right, from defined benefit, the employer is the one that has the risk. In defined contribution, it's the employee. When the employer is making those contributions, and if you have employee contributions, they are as well, they're going into the plan, they're being invested in the total market fund with all of our other communities, even though you have separate trusts, and you are getting the benefit of the investment income from those contributions. So last year, MERS returned over 14% gross of fees. You made, a good amount of money on the contributions that you had put in. If you were in defined contribution, you just lost out on those dollars in terms of the investment income, but me as the employee would gain. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's missed opportunity there. And I think it's important also to note that over half of our retirees' pension payments comes from the investment income that's generated. So it's, it's a situation where you have to look individually. It's not always cheaper. That was a really long answer to your question, but it is. You have to really compare those two
Well, I'm
things.
just stating that when that individual retires on defined contribution, the township's responsibility is done, basically.
Correct.
It is
Yeah.
done.
So, yeah, when you're an employee in defined contribution, if you say, we're gonna put in 10% of your wages, once you put in the wages, I'm 59 and a half, I leave employment and my account balance is 500,000, you're done. You have no legacy costs or anything like that, because what I have is what I have to live on. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Ernie, I think you were next.
Couple of things.
Yeah,
On the defined benefit plan, to move that over, you said 80%. We're
Yeah.
at 78, something between 78 and 79, so which means the township would have to find those dollars to bring it up to 80%, and that, and have to be maintained at 80%.
So to go to defined contribution, just for new hires, there's no funding requirement. But if you're going to defined contribution for new hires and also offering your existing employees conversion from defined benefit to defined contribution, you have to be funded at 80%. And the reason for that is because there's a state law that says you can't diminish a benefit earned. Anything under 80%, when we calculate out their pension amount, is considered a benefit diminishment. So only if you're offering conversion do you have to meet the 80% to move to defined contribution.
So what you're saying is, being more defined benefit, to move that over with even just one person, we still have to be at 80%.
No. So if you are talking about the situation with a new person coming in,
I'm
no?
talking about the current employees.
Yep,
If even one of those want to go into the defined contribution.
Yes.
We have to be at 80%.
correct.
Only one.
Yeah,
So whether it's one or the whole
or the whole division,
whole
yeah.
division, we still
Yeah.
have to be at 80%. So you have to move
That's
the
correct.
full works or none.
Yes.
In that.
Yeah,
You can move it, but it's gonna cost us X number of dollars
Yeah.
at that point in time, so.
yes, you're correct. At a division level, yes.
So, and you still have a legacy, I call it unfunded liability sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's 80% or not, you have unfunded liability, which is ours is over $3 million at this point in time.
Right.
So how would that be carried over if you happen to move the whole works over to that?
So, I don't think that situation would happen. I mean, if you offered conversion, chances are not many people, if any, would take the conversion because they're giving up a lifetime benefit forever for the rest of their life and moving to a variable, plan in terms of defined contribution. If you did it at division level, and everybody in that division were to leave defined benefit and move to defined contribution, then that would be calculated out in terms of the township on your annual valuation report, and we would have to see any contributions that would remain would be held in your trust separately. So it's essentially a credit to the township. But a lot of that, when we calculate out their present value of accrued benefits, when we move them from defined benefit to defined contribution, you're paying them out, essentially. So you're buying out, you know, their defined benefit plan to move them into defined contribution. So there's not gonna be a large amount of credit back or anything like that.
Well, if you're buying them out, which means you have the unfunded liability sitting there, which is there.
Yeah.
So you have to take that percent and buy it and send it over to the other, so the township's gonna have to come up with those dollars to do it.
Correct. Yes.
Based on a net present value basis.
Yeah.
Whatever value it is, we're still obligated to pay that dollar.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, the issue that you're gonna run into with your current employees is that the majority of them are already vested in the defined benefit plan. They've been
Yeah.
here over 10 years. You know, so they're already vested, or they're right on the edge of currently vesting,
Yeah.
7, 8 years, you know, is the issue.
Why would they? They would-
No.
If they're vested, they're gonna stay vested.
Well, I have seen situations where that has occurred.
Yeah.
Back during the Engler administration, when I was with Marquette County, when defined contribution first became an item of discussion under Governor Engler, some of the county employees that were in the defined benefit plan converted because the net present value was, as Tara mentioned, in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000.
Yeah.
And at that time, the market was returning about 12%. So, you know, they did their quick calculations and thought, well, that's great. About 2 years later, the market crashed, and they're all back at work now.
Yeah.
So, because they had nothing left. History here is, when I came in 2002, the retirement plan was a 401, whatever, KXY, whatever letter it was. It was a 401 plan, basically, and the employees were looking at that, and it was not generating anything, basically, in the investments. So that's how the discussion came up about converting to a defined benefit plan. And they basically rolled all their balances into this plan to pre-fund it at that point. That's why you're at 78% funding.
Yeah.
So I think what you'd be looking at with your discussion later on the agenda is what Tara was mentioning earlier, the option where you have a defined benefit plan. By resolution, you add the option for a defined contribution plan for the one potential employee that wanted to do it. At some point, the bargain units will either raise it or not raise it in their collective bargaining in terms of a desire to move. From the standpoint of savings, it's savings on the initial front end, and you see a number of communities around, I won't name any, but a number of communities around who saw a dramatic reduction in their funded level for their remaining defined benefit employees, because a couple of things happen. People are living longer, so your long-term legacy costs, as Tara referred to them, Ernie, unfunded liability, same thing, is growing because people are living longer.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, the returns, the investment returns are keeping pace with that and doing pretty well. As you mentioned, we're at now, what, 13 billion, I think, invested? Is the
Close
to
to
13?
almost
13
13
billion in
billion,
our
yeah.
investment fund?
Yep.
And that returned 12%. So, I mean, those are real dollars.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, you know, defined benefit is very long-term plans, and over the long term, MERS investments have outperformed our benchmarks, which is really important because, again, going back to that piece of the income from the investments paying out your retirees, that's a big number. So when we look at our 35-year average, we're still over 8.5% in the market, which is really good. And again, last year, we had a great market year. So MERS really positions our portfolio to participate in the upside and protect in the down. And, you know, we still have to pay out retirees' pensions, so we have to be careful in terms of the risk. But we're doing a really good job with the investment side.
Dave?
Okay, if I understood what you were saying about the vesting part is, if you have someone that's on a defined benefit and it is frozen and a defined contribution has begun, when you reach 10 years, you're vested in both of them. It doesn't change, correct?
That's correct.
And if you've only got 3 years left that you're in a defined contribution, you're still vested in both of them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Assuming that that the township decided to convert to a defined contribution because it's what the union groups wanted, or for whatever reason. And their approach was to freeze the defined benefit and then move to a defined contribution. Is there a concern of meeting your liabilities on a defined benefit as the years go on and employees start drawing off of that?
So under a defined benefit freeze, so you take all your current active employees who are on defined benefit, you freeze their time, and defined contribution is their new plan going forward. Right now, you would see an actuarial credit because of that, because now we're not anticipating paying them out for, all those years until they get to retirement. Typically, that's what happened under a DB freeze. But again, it depends on what the amount is that you're going to offer them in defined contribution. So I just delivered a report last week to a board, and it did not benefit them really to do that because the contribution amount was much more in the defined contribution than what their normal cost was for defined benefit. So you're not going to see an issue in terms of paying off the unfunded accrued liability. We have you on a set amortization schedule to do that. As of the end of 2018, it was 20 years. So you're going to continue to pay off that debt because, of course, you have active employees, you have retirees and beneficiaries who are drawing on that. And until everybody's passed away, you're not going to be done with that unfunded liability. Even if you reach 100% funding, you still have the potential to fall, depending on, all of those assumptions.
Maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying right, is if we're under a defined benefit and as people retire and start drawing on it, there's other employees, new employees that are putting money into that
Defined benefit plan?
defined benefit fund.
Yeah.
If you freeze the defined benefit and everybody went to a defined contribution, that income into that fund quits.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's where I'm wondering if there's a situation that can arise where the amount of money being paid out of the defined benefits is not sufficient to take care of the employees that are owed that money.
Not necessarily. I understand what you're saying. So I think the biggest piece of that is that you'll miss out when those new people are going to define contribution on the investment income, as I was saying earlier. But when you have those new people in defined contribution, that defined benefit is froze, you'll have that amortization period where you're going to continue to make your payments to pay it off. Even though there's nobody new coming in to help fund that plan, you'll be essentially a closed defined benefit plan and will be, making your payments accordingly. So your schedule will be you have 20 years to pay off the liability, 19, 18, much like a home mortgage in that case. So
from
I
that
don't.
perspective, there is an additional cost to township then.
There could be. It's hard to say without seeing a projection. There could be. There's not an additional cost like there used to be because prior to the last experience study, which was in 2014, before we had a fixed amortization schedule, that's the period in which you have to pay off your unfunded accrued liability. We had this rolling amortization period, which essentially was, and we started at 30 years and we continued to drop down. But essentially what rolling was is I have a home mortgage, I have a 30-year mortgage, I pay for it on it for a year, and I go back to the bank after that year and I refinance for another 30 years. So you were slowly paying down your unfunded accrued liability, but then you were refinancing it. Do you see what I mean? So the old way, you were really never catching up. Now the board has made that decision to go to this fixed amortization period. You've been on that since 2015, where you are paying it much like a home mortgage. You're not refinancing it. You're going down 1 year for every year. So it's taking care of itself in terms of the payments. But it won't charge you anymore in the short term. Does that make sense?
I think what Dave was getting at, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what you were asking, it sounds like your question could be a yes. It could end up costing the township more depending upon what happens with beneficiaries and how long people live.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
my question.
and yes, it could, because you don't have any more direct contributions going into the fund. You're relying on the investment return of what's already in the fund. And as people retire, and if they live longer, or if they have spouses that are younger that are then beneficiaries, you could at some point find yourselves in a position of having to start refunding that long-term benefit.
Yeah.
And I guess
obligation.
that would
Possible.
sound like it would kind of depend on the age of the median age of your employees when you froze the defined benefit, because if nobody retired for the next 10 or 15 years after it was froze, you'd be fine.
yeah,
But
Right.
if you froze it this year and next year, 4 or 5 employees that were of the right age retired, and they start taking money out of that, you might not be fine.
correct, yeah,
Right. Or folks that have 5 years of service with you and then leave to go to another employer.
Yeah.
That's also a MERS employer. At some point, will start drawing off of the 5 years with you. They'll draw from both, and they could be, you know, their individual situations could be different, where they have a younger beneficiary or whatever. So, I mean, ultimately, it's a crapshoot, basically, it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, there would have to be an actuarial done, as Tara mentioned. There, you know, if that decision was made to do that, to make that conversion, there would be an actuarial calculation of what your long-term debt may be with a set amount of income being projected, to give you a better picture as to whether you might have to pre-fund or not pre-fund. But at some point, you may have to bond, and you've got several communities around the UP that right now are facing that their calculations didn't pan out to what they thought it would be, because people are living longer. Now the actuarial age jumped from 75 to 85, so that's 10 more years of potential retirement draw.
One last point to clarify is I thought the state had changed the time to vest to 5 years from 10. That's not true? Still
no,
10 years?
that's still up to the individual municipality.
Okay, so it's,
Yeah,
all right.
that's a
Some
township's
municipalities
decision.
have. Some
Yeah.
have gone all the way down to 3 years. You know, the city of Marquette has a group of folks that are on a 3-year.
So we
They
just
vested
currently
after-
happen to be at 10 years.
We are at 10, which is the standard. You know, 10 years of service, age 60 is the standard retirement. There are options. I mean, the standard options are 15 years at age 55 and 25 years at age 50 are the standards that are out there. But individual communities, as Tara mentioned, could set whatever vesting period you actually feel comfortable with. Now, that impacts your actuarial costs, obviously.
Okay, then
You
I
have less time
then I
to
have one
pre-fund
last
it.
question.
Okay,
A new employee that's under defined contribution,
Mm-hmm.
he still has 10 years to vest?
no. So when you create a new defined contribution plan, there's a lot of different options. It's not like defined benefit at all. So you could say, we want immediate vesting for that employee. We could do a cliff vesting where after 5 years, they're immediate, you know, they're vested. You could do what's called a graded vesting where after 1 year, they're vested at 20%, 2 year, 40. So there's a lot of different options on defined contribution, where defined benefit
We establish
is.
what that is by the policy.
You
that we
establish
set.
that, yeah.
When you set up your plan, your defined contribution plan, you set those parameters. And basically, what that amounts to is if you're making a contribution, that's at what point they own your contribution.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So I want to clarify, if I could, though, just a couple points. So when, you know, the conversation, there's a lot of different conversations about what could potentially happen in terms of options here. But I want to make sure everybody's understanding. So if the township says, okay, we're in this position and we can't afford our payments, we really want to take care of the unfunded liability, that's a conversation for making additional payments into the plan, freezing the defined benefit plan for current actives. Anytime you're making changes for your current active employees, that's going to have that immediate impact on the funded level and the unfunded accrued liability. If the conversation is, nope, we're just looking kind of long-term, and we want to know our options. We don't want to do anything with our current active employees. We keep them on defined benefit. Then you can move to defined contribution Never mind the conversation about conversion unless you want to do that. You could just say, okay, we are no longer offering defined benefit to any new employee coming through the door. That's just considered a defined benefit closed division, closed plan, and all new hires come in under defined contribution. So there's a couple different conversations happening, and it's easy to get them confused. So defined benefit to defined contribution can just be that. Closing defined benefit, opening defined contribution. It could be the other conversation, we're keeping all of our current actives on defined benefit, and anybody new that meets the criteria of those go into defined benefit. And we also offer defined contribution for, you know, somebody that's looking for that type of a plan. So you have plans alongside each other. Does that make sense? The freeze conversation and the conversion conversation are another, you know, another way to reduce the liability. But I'm not sure that that's the township's goal at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure that was clarified.
Going back to vesting, Dave answered, got a lot of questions, but one of the things you're talking about, vesting on a defined contribution, we can either have immediate vesting, or you could do a year 20% and 3 years of 50%, something like this.
Yeah.
And that's being done at this point in time, something like that?
It can be done. So if you were to bring in defined contribution, the township would set the parameters of what that looks like, and the employer contribution, what do you want to contribute as the township to that plan? What type of vesting do you want that employee to meet? Like I said, absolutely, Ernie, it could be right away, they're vested. It could be after a year. It could be after up to 6 years on defined contribution. So.
I'm trying to figure out why you would have these different options in that investing, the benefit for doing something like that.
So the vesting period applies to the township's dollars only. In defined contribution, there's also normally an employee contribution. They're always vested in theirs. But typically an employer goes, well, we want to make sure these people are going to stick around, so we want to at least have some type of a vesting period on the money we put into the plan. That's the reason for the vesting. But if, let's say, you can have no employer contribution on defined contribution and just employee contributions if you wanted to, in that situation, there's no vesting period, right? Because they're automatically, they're vested in their plan right away. So there's just a lot of different options.
Right, the vesting, as Tara mentioned, the vesting only has to do with what the township contributes, and basically
Correct.
that's at what point you're going to allow them to keep your money.
Yeah.
You know, and the whole point of that, as she said, is to ensure that you're gonna have some, if you wanna have somebody in place for at least 3 years, that's your vesting period. You know, okay, we're gonna keep putting the money in every year, but it's not yours until you've been here for 3 years.
Yeah.
Well, let's get specific then, because, and I was trying to find my notes. If I remember right, excuse me, the candidate asked us for 18,000 put into defined contribution and immediate vesting.
Okay.
And we said we weren't going to do that, but if we contributed the amount of money that we would have contributed to the benefit program, it would have been about 14,000.
Okay.
So that means it was 14,570 or 750. So that means if it was immediately vested, we would put that amount of money in, whether he matched it or not, with maybe rolling his over or making a new contribution. He'd be able to take it out tomorrow.
If he were to
if he
leave,
left. right?
yeah,
Or
he'd
we
be
fired
immediately
him, or
vested.
whatever happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as what we have to consider later, that's the scenario. If we agree to having, as long as I understand this right, if we agree to the second request or the additional request, the contribution from the township would be 14,000 something, 570 or 750.
Yeah, and
Invested immediately.
Well, and-
Vested, not invested.
Yeah, where that's coming from is, right now with this particular candidate, based on the salary range that's being talked about, we would pay in the defined benefit plan 13.41% of that salary. That would be the premium that would be paid in, and that's $14,756, I believe is what it calculates out to. So the board could, if you wanted to go that route, you could, as part of that employment contract, establish that it would be on a defined contribution retirement, that the township would contribute not more than 13.41% for each completed year. And that could be a lump sum payment, basically. You know, I mean, and then basically that would be the vesting. If they finish the year, that would be their vesting for that year, that year's contribution, to be followed succeeding for how many years. The specific case that we're talking about, the rationale for it is that the individual is currently on a defined contribution plan, does not have vested time necessarily in the defined benefit plan to transfer to ours, and has some concerns about potential political or physical capability of being in position for 10 years. So that's why he's talking about defined contribution as opposed to the 10-year vesting defined benefit.
And I will double check too, internally tomorrow, just on the question, because I am not 100% sure. With the immediate vesting, I know that they're immediately vested, but I'm not 100% sure on the time frame in which, typically, like to use MERS to MERS time, the employee has to be here for at least a year for vesting purposes. So I just want to double check, because I'm not sure, like, if he were to come, you made the contribution, and then, you know, he left, or he or she, what the fallback would be in terms of the vesting period. So I'll double check on that to see what those
And
parameters
he wasn't
are.
suggesting that by any means that short of a time frame, but
Right,
because he said
yeah.
immediately vested.
Yes,
I wanted to make sure that that's what that meant.
Yeah.
The money was in there.
yep, and then he or she
And
could
when
take it
they
out.
take it out,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, but I will double check on the time frame, because there's a lot of nuances with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's mostly IRS, Internal
Yeah.
Revenue Service
Yeah.
requirements.
Okay, Dave,
What's, for our current employees that are under the defined benefit, what's the township's current,
13, that's what he said, 13.41.
that's what we're currently investing in all of our employees?
No, for the administrative unit, it's 13.41, and that's what you were tying this to. It's a little bit less for the AFSCME unit,
Yeah.
because there's more of them, and they're younger.
Clear as mud. We think we understand.
Well, it is complicated.
We
I mean,
understand
It is
well
very
enough.
complicated.
It's complicated because we have to meet IRS requirements and regulations and, several statutes and a variety of things. But that's the calculation right now, and that rate, that 13.41% for the administrative group is predicated upon their age, numbers of years of service, and their wage, their salary level with their projected long-term actuarial cost. That's what our contribution is to meet that long-term cost for that group.
Ultimately, we're here to partner with you. We want to make sure that the goal of the township is met. So whatever your needs are in terms of hiring somebody new or the existing employees will meet. Any type of actuarial information that needs to be done for any of these conversations, we would provide the numbers. It's hard. I don't want to be up here speaking, in general terms, but without numbers, it's really hard to say whether or not it's more expensive in the long run or those things. So that's our job, though, to sit down with you and really work through these situations and make sure that we're meeting what your goal is.
I think the main question we all had, excuse me, is number one, could we do it?
Yes.
It's no different than, and it's out of your bailiwick, but, somebody comes in and has a Blue Cross plan or a different insurance company, and they're a new employee, and they want to know if they can roll it in or modify
Yes.
what we have or something, and we try to figure out, is
Yeah.
that possible? This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
We've had a request, and we're trying to see if this is possible.
Yes.
So the first question is, can we do it?
Yes.
Second question is, how much is it going to cost, or what process do we have to go through, if any?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we already said the ordinance, and
Yep.
then the vesting part, I guess, the specifics about what's being asked.
Yes.
So that's what we're gonna have to ask, or I have to ask of the board, further into the agenda.
Right.
And that's what I'm asking them now. Do you have enough information to be able to discuss that and make some kind of a decision or not? I mean, nothing has to happen tonight. I'm not saying we have to have a motion if you need more information, but do you have enough basic information to have a discussion? If not, this is the time to, I don't know if you were gonna stay for the rest of the meeting.
I can do whatever you need me to do. So I'll summarize that. Can you do it? Yes. Add a defined contribution to your current defined benefit? Yes. What happens in that situation if you're just bringing it alongside? Nothing happens to your current defined benefit plan. The only cost on the defined contribution is what you decide internally to give to the new person in that defined contribution plan. The other conversations about the freezing and the conversion are a totally different conversation and I think a different time. But for the purposes of what you're asking, absolutely you can do it. No impact to the current defined benefit plan if it's not closed and you're just bringing that alongside. And then the parameters of that new defined contribution plan are set. Tammy and I will work with the township on what that looks like, and I'll get the question asked about the vesting, or answered, I'm sorry, about the vesting period.
Did you have your hand up, Randy?
Yeah, I was just going to basically do the same thing Terry just did, but, you know, and with regard to the request, if you were to grant the request to bring the defined contribution alongside for that particular candidate, then it just, your two decisions are, if you want to mirror what you would have paid into the defined benefit, it's $14,750, 13.41%. And then the question of when that becomes the candidate's money is the vesting. And, you know, those are the two questions you would then have to answer. Or simply say, no, we don't want to do that. It's defined benefit or nothing, and make a decision.
Ernie?
Looking at that, I know it's not, it's easy to do the combined defined contribution. We can do that, that's not a problem. What I have is we have everyone in the defined benefit at this point in time.
Correct.
And all the dollars are going into that big pot at
Yes.
this point in time. Not for the individual, but it goes into a gigantic fund.
Yep, it goes into
We
the
start
total
moving
market.
people away from that. Those dollars will not go into that fund to, that revenue is not coming in.
Correct.
Right.
And it will decrease it by how much? That's the question I have, is that if you move people away,
Yeah,
all of a sudden you're not having that revenue coming in and you have retirees who are not paying into it.
Right.
Too, so,
yeah.
question, that's my concern is, at what point in time are we gonna end up some financial problems in that? Sure, it's only maybe one position, but we don't know what the future may bring either. Because you don't, when we pay that dollars into the organization, it does not go to that one person.
Correct.
It goes to the
Pool,
pool.
yes.
So that pool's got X number of dollars, so you're relying on the new employees coming in continually funding that pool. And that. So if you start decreasing the number there, you're gonna have some problems in the future. How much, I don't know, but it just, looking at financially, that could be a concern.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a valid concern. So I think in the situation that we're talking about tonight with one person, you know, keeping defined benefit open for all your employees and anybody new minus this one person, you'll be fine with one person in defined contribution. Even if you were to switch to defined contribution for all new employees, your current active people stay on defined benefit, but all new employees, you're absolutely correct. So you're missing out because when you're in defined benefit, those contributions are going in. They're being invested in our pool with over $12 billion, and you get the market return on those contributions that you put in as the township. If you have new people coming in under defined contribution, and we return like we did last year, they get the benefit of that as an individual employee because those are their dollars invested into that new defined contribution plan. However, there is a plan in place, and I think it goes back, was it Dave, to your question about, you know, looking in the future, how we do have mechanisms in place to keep you going forward even, because many of our communities have switched to defined contribution. Even if you've done that for everybody, new hires coming in, I don't anticipate you having a big issue in the future But again, you're looking at two different costs. Does that make sense? Does it answer your question?
Okay. Randy and then Roger, or Roger, are you first? Okay.
Just a real quick follow-up on Treasurer Johnson's question. I think it's important to understand how your fund is established and set up. Everything that either the township pays in or the employees pay in on the defined benefit goes into a trust. It's the Marquette Charter Township Trust Fund. Each individual employee has their own account within that trust. So based on their age, their wage, everything else, they are contributing into their fund. So let's assume our new planner that we just hired he's in the defined benefit plan. Every pay period, a piece gets paid in to the trust on his behalf in his account. If he leaves employment before he reaches 10 years, that all stays in that account. And if he does not go to another MERS employer within 5 years of leaving, that money stays in that account and will never be drawn by him. If he goes to another MERS employer, he continues to build towards that 10 years. And when he reaches 10 years, he'll draw 7 years' worth from our trust fund, 3 years' worth, or however many years beyond, 10, from the second one. So the point being is that every time you have a turnover of a staff member who does not go to another MERS employer, that money that you've paid in and that has been generated by the investment income stays in your fund. That's why defined benefit is important to continue to keep that funding going, because that's what, it's actually closer to 66% of all of the retirement benefits paid out come from that investment return.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's set up, and that's how it works. It's like a huge, it's like going to the bank with your own account, basically.
Yeah.
So when I retire, whatever I draw will be from what I've contributed over the 18 years that I've been here, and the investment return on that will be my retirement benefit. And nobody else has access to it. I don't draw off of anybody else's. If it runs out of money, it runs out of money. It's never going to, because the investment, the investment return is always going to be higher than what I'm drawing out of it annually. So that's how these things are set up to work, and it works.
Roger.
I heard one question at a prior meeting that I think has been answered, but I thought it was an important one that I just wanted to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
If we offer a defined contribution plan alongside the existing defined benefit plan, and that plan, the defined contribution plan, is only available to one employee, even if that employee is a top-level, top-tier employee, we're allowed to do that and would not violate what used to be the top-heavy type of rules. That scenario, we can have the two different plans and with different vesting schedules, and that doesn't violate anything.
Nope, you will be totally in compliance.
Okay.
Yes,
And-
that's
and
a
I-
good question.
And I think I heard that being
Yeah.
indirectly answered, but that was a question that we discussed a little bit at length previously without
Yes.
knowing an answer.
Nope, I can tell you absolutely that you will still be in compliance and within your fiduciary duty of what we have
Spent
in
an
terms of
awful lot of time
plans.
at the MERS board level talking about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Anything else for right now, at least?
You're very welcome. I'm available if you have any questions. Okay.
Well, we're going to cover it in a few minutes here. Okay, community linkage. I approached a few of our representatives and elected officials and talked about, part of policy governance says that we need to communicate with our local officials. So even if we didn't do that, we should still, even if we didn't follow policy governance, I think we should still try to connect with them periodically. So I reached out to a couple of them and Representative Cambenzi's office got back to me and said she would be happy to come and talk to us, either during a board meeting or a work session or whatever we want. And Mondays and Fridays are her best days to come. So if you're interested, I can set something up with her. If you'd like to try, I explained to her that if she might have remembered that we have had what they were called the fearsome foursome before, senators and representatives, and we'd meet in the community room. A few times we had smaller groups, sometimes we had just public officials, we brought in, the whole community. If you want me to set something like that up again, if you want to have her just come to a meeting, I would be happy to do whatever that. I think we need to do something like that this year. At least once, if nothing else, just for the community. We need to have those people here. So I'm looking for thoughts, input, ideas. What do you think? Mondays and Fridays, fall outside of our normal board meetings. She thought that Fridays might be bad because people, are going to shop or bank or whatever on the weekend or leave, and that Monday nights might be good. And we've kind of got that 4 to 7 o'clock window would be good for her if you want to try to do that, or if you want me to try to get
Are you talking with the 4 reps?
whatever,
Before?
yeah. This is Sarah's request, or response to my request. So she would be available. We'd have to figure out when,
Right.
but like a Monday or Friday night. Now, if you want me to call McBroom and, whoever else, that's totally fine too. I'll get a hold of them.
I'd like that. I think it was very beneficial, and I think the people who came enjoyed it. And they were happy to come. I mean, when we had
Absolutely.
Kiva and we had Casperson and Broom and Copper Country rep.
You want me to try to pull everybody together that I can for a Monday night, like maybe April or May, see, I don't know how far out their schedules are. Once the snow's kind of gone, it might be easier for people to get in here, if it was, well, I better have to do July. But we could shoot for like April open house, something like that.
Why don't we explore it and see what you come up with?
All right,
August if you want to miss snow.
Yeah.
pardon?
August if you want to miss snow.
That's why I said,
The only month we haven't had snow.
it's gonna take a long time for these banks
say
to
that.
melt.
Well, here.
Excuse me, okay, so maybe a Monday night, I'll see what's available, and we'll try to get as many as we can then, 3 or 4, okay. Okay. Board committee updates, David and Pete, sir.
Did you want to maybe move 9C up so we can take care of that question while Tara's here? Not have her sit through all the committee
We
reports and
can.
everything?
I was thinking about doing that before we even started. I didn't know we were gonna spend so much time on that. Anybody wanna do that? Move,
Get through our committee reports, and we can just move that up on the policy discussion here.
okay. Move it up from 9D to 9A.
9C to 9A.
Yep, sorry. Okay,
Unless the committee reports are gonna be an hour long.
go ahead, Dave.
Fairly brief, the Planning Commission's January 22nd meeting was simply a review of the master plan draft that we have currently, and we are working on the detailed use text amendment to the zoning ordinance to accommodate the marijuana zoning for both recreational and, yeah, the other one.
Medical.
Medical. As you remember, that the definitions for that are already completed in the zoning text amendment. We're just working on where it's going to go, what's the guidelines that it's going to go in, and what zoning districts we're going to put them in. So that'll be done, I'm sure, a couple months out yet. The road committee, the January 7th as well as the February 4th, tonight's meeting, was working on the Farner bid for the road rehabilitation bid, and that recommendation was arrived at tonight from the road committee, and it'll be forwarded to the manager's consideration on how it fits into the budget. The Recreation Committee, from January the 21st, election of officers took place, and Todd Caruth is the chairman, Mike Springer is the vice chair, and I am the secretary. And just an update on the Safe Routes to School application. North Star Montessori Academy elected not to proceed with the grant application for this year. And unless there's any questions, that would be it.
So that puts us on hold too if we wanted to. Yep, sorry, that puts us on hold too if we were gonna go.
That's strictly a grant that has to be applied for by the school, so.
Ernie, go ahead.
One question for Dave. In reading the minutes, road committee minutes on the 7th, they're talking about the county road committee plans to use a recycled tire mix, resurfacing of Commerce Drive.
I can give you an update on that. That grant was turned down. Michigan Tech decided not to go through with that.
Okay. I just wondered what it was all about, that was all.
They were gonna test a road segment with some recycled rubber and stuff in the asphalt. That was through Michigan Tech. They decided that they weren't gonna do it here.
Okay.
That came in as late as yesterday, I think.
They had been talking to Tech, though, the solid waste was talking to them, Tech too, whether to use it up in Houghton even, I thought maybe in place of stamp sand, the crushed glass. Did you hear anything about that?
No, all we were looking at was an update on the,
Just the
Drive.
on Commerce Drive, and they elected not to go through with the Commerce Drive thing.
Oh. Randy, do you have another comment, or was that from before?
Oh, that was from before.
Pete, anything on events?
Vince, we got a meeting coming up Friday, to set out the, the dates for the whole year for 4 different events. And we'll have that set up this coming Thursday, the February 20th. It's the third Thursday of the month. We're gonna have the music in the mall, the same as before, from 5 to 7 at the Westwood Mall. Have three bands, food and vendors there, so it'd be good to stop in and take a look at it and just enjoy the music.
5:30 to 7.
5:30 to 7? Oh, I thought it had 5 to 7.
5 to 7, sorry.
5 to 7. But this, this coming Friday, we'll set it for the car show, the community days, and all the other ones. So then we'll have a schedule for, maybe in a month, we'll have a schedule for everything. So,
Sounds good. Dave?
It's at 11 o'clock on this coming Friday?
yes, 11 o'clock at the mall.
Okay. So just reading the draft committee reports tonight that included the road committee minutes of January 7th, Marquette County Solid Waste Management Authority regular board meeting minutes of January 15th, and the Downtown Development Authority minutes of January 14th. Now, if somebody wants to move,
I'll make a motion, we move 9C to 9A and reorder the rest of the agenda.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So consider correspondence from manager candidate. We touched on this a little bit tonight already in our discussion with the MERS representative. The offer that we made to the candidate was, the last offer we made was our last and final offer. His question back related only to the retirement plan. We've gotten the information from our MERS representative that it doesn't compromise us in any way. We can do the specifics of what the vesting period is and what the percentage is, and that's kind of the second part of the question. But the first part of the question in my mind is, are we willing to consider his request? to the final draft that we did for his contract. And then the second part, if that is the case and we are willing to do that, then how does it play out? The amount, the dollars, the vesting, okay?
You want a consensus?
No, I think we need a motion. Randy?
Well, I looked at this when the offer came back, or I guess the correspondence from the candidate came back. Basically, he was just wondering or questioning whether or not that defined contribution plan is available and whether or not we'd be willing to do that. And I thought of it like this, it's not an unreasonable request for what his position is. It's not really going out of the whole total package we've offered because the money is the same. The budgeted amount of money is the same for either plan. I think Tara said, I think you'd probably have to work a year to be vested in that fairly, our portion of it probably.
Double checking on that, so we're looking at it right now. I have our coordinator too checking. And I pulled up the adoption agreement and it shows under vesting immediate and then under contribution structure, it says for the employer, withholding represents the actual period amounts are withheld from the employee paycheck because it has to be done for payroll. And it shows here weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, or other. So I think if your intent is, you want that person to be here at least a year, you could make a one-time contribution maybe at the end of that year and then they're immediately vested. Or if you're looking to want to do that right away, I'm double checking, don't quote me on this yet, but I believe if you were to do that right away, that person would be immediately vested
Vested.
with those dollars. so
Correct.
that year wouldn't apply. If you were doing it like weekly, bi-weekly, obviously that wouldn't be going in fully until the year end. That would be where that year would come in. But if it's a lump sum right up front, I believe that person would be immediately vested. We're double checking.
Well, I would think you'd do it the same as the rest of employees, as you would, as you put it in like bi-weekly, Randy, or monthly or whatever.
Yeah, because then you'll find yourself in a discussion about lost opportunity for investment in earnings and a variety of things. So I think, Clerk Rattari is right. The best way to do that would be wash in and out of payroll on a bi-weekly basis, just like every other employee's is.
And then no one's not treated unfairly because you're just doing it on the same schedule as the other employees.
Yes. So you would be making, whether it be a contribution on a percentage or a dollar amount, bi-weekly, however you do your payroll, into the defined contribution plan based on that person's wages, and you figure that out. And then after that year, right, is when that total amount would be in there and it would be immediately
Right.
vested.
And they would have the benefit of the investment return. Mhm.
So I guess, so further my comment, it didn't seem like an unreasonable request, and if it was put in the same as the other employees, I don't know why we wouldn't consider that request.
Is that a motion?
I guess, yes, I guess it would be.
Support?
I wouldn't, I'll state my motion first. I'll state my motion that we consider amending our offer to include a defined contribution plan to the candidate's contract.
With a one-year vesting,
Well, it'll be bi-weekly, but
I was gonna say, but it's still,
the
asking
whole,
for immediate vesting, so I wanna make sure it's clear.
yeah, well, I mean, it's gonna go in, but I just wouldn't want to put it all there at once. Just do it as the same as the other employees. I mean, you're getting the same amount of money in the long run, it's just,
Okay, so, but to follow, the payroll
payroll
deductions for a year.
schedule, yeah.
And John, you're okay with that explanation?
Yes.
Bi-weekly, for a year, and then vested.
Well, you'd be vested after 1 year then, if that's how, how we do it for the others, but I mean,
Okay. Were you first, Ernie?
I don't know.
Do you remember? Okay, go ahead.
That's fine, but I'm looking at investing. Immediate investing, looking at what she said, we're bringing in an employee, and you're paying into it, and you're assuming that employee is gonna stay. You don't have any idea what's going on. She brought up a couple of points there, and I elaborated on a little bit, is that, after 1 year, be 50% employee, and invested, and then after 2 years, it'd be something else. It's forcing the employee to make a commitment to the township over a period of time. And that, but right now, you're not making any commitment. You're putting money in it, and there's no commitment at all in that. So, and we are supposed to be the fiscal agents for the township, and we have to be concerned with that at the same time. So, regardless about the employee, you have to be concerned about the financial things at the same time. So, to come up and say, okay, they're gonna pay the same amount of percentage, that I don't have a problem with. It's the vesting portion of them at this point in time on that, and, you have no idea what's gonna happen in a year, 2 years, or 3 years. So that's where I'm looking at this point in time.
Can I jump in real quick? Is that okay?
Sure.
So I got the answer. Immediate is immediate. So if you went the route of we hire a new person into defined contribution and we put an annual lump sum anytime throughout the year, whether it be right away or at the end, it's immediate. That's, they could walk out the door and take it all. If you do it incrementally, like we're talking about on percent of wage bi-weekly, and you do immediate vesting, then there's little amounts, right, that there's.
It's only the portion already,
So
yeah.
it would take a significant amount of time for that person to have a decent balance in there, right? So probably
Right.
14,000 after a year of employer contributions it would take for that person then to leave. I mean, you know, you put in 14% of the wage per month, they'd be immediately vested with that.
For that portion.
Yeah, so just for that portion. But to clarify that, immediate is
So in a year, if they worked 6 months, they would be half vested.
Correct.
Toward that 14,000. Okay.
under the immediate.
Or 3 months, or 6 months, or, okay. Okay, Dave?
A couple questions. First is, we have a motion on the floor, correct?
Yes, that's what we're addressing.
I guess the problem is we made a motion on the January 20th, and it was approved that was the final motion for a contract. So we're talking about another contract offer.
The motion was to amend it.
We don't need to rescind that last motion?
You can check with legal, but I don't know.
Blue Cross or
We're
anything like
not
that.
really changing the terms of what was offered per se, because the amount is the same amount. It's an excellent
Packaged
question.
differently.
The package is the same package. You're not increasing the amount that's being offered. Are you nonetheless making a revision to the, to address the pension, the retirement plan? Yes.
Yeah, my question is, are we actually making him another offer?
No, you're not.
Huh?
That's a hairspray.
I know, but-
Yeah, I
Which,
see.
that's what I'm paid, I guess, to do.
There you go.
It's just like adding your insurance. I got 3, 4 kids I'm gonna put on. When you're hired.
I think the answer would be clear if you were changing the package that's being offered, that's a different offer. I can certainly justify that this is not a different offer that's being made. It's a fine tuning of your existing offer.
That's why I used the health insurance as an example. Because if someone had some different, maybe that's a bad example, but if they had a different health insurance plan, we would try to see how it would adapt or change what we already had in place.
I guess for clarification, I would ask that he was sent a contract offer. Did it say defined benefit anyplace in that
Yes, it
contract?
did.
Then we're gonna change that contract to defined contribution, so that's a different offer if I'm,
That's a Roger question.
No.
That technically is. Let me give another example. If the offer said that we're going to pay the health insurance, and the employee then said, okay, I don't really need health insurance anymore, and we have a policy that indicates that we will pay a stipend if the health insurance isn't taken, that technically is a difference, but it doesn't change the package because the same amount of money is being paid. I guess the cautionary route would be you can always, you can amend your offer no matter what.
well, my question is because the last motion was worded that it was a final offer from. That was the wording in the last motion, and that was approved. Then it's obviously not the final offer from, because we're making him another offer.
We aren't making an offer.
Just defining what he wants.
We're,
I'm posing the question.
I made the original motion.
I believe we are.
I made the original motion, and I did state best and final. But in lieu of the information that has just come up, this is not changing the amount of money that we offered him. It's just changing some language. And it's at a gray area, yeah. Is it?
I'm not, I don't want to argue the point. I'm just asking if we already sent him a contract that said A, B, and C, and we're now changing the contract to say A, B, and D, is that not a new contract that we're offering for his consideration? In order to do that, do we need to rescind the last motion that said final?
but we're not making a different offer.
Okay.
We are not.
Then it's asked and answered.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, from that perspective, I don't think you need to rescind. I think you're still fine tuning your existing terms.
Correct.
Randy, you had your hand up.
The only thing I'm suggesting is just adding defined contribution or defined benefit. So, I mean, you're adding one term in there, and that's what the candidate requested. And I think I know what he's gonna take, but we didn't know if we could do this at the last board meeting. We now know we can, and we sort of know our parameters by doing that, so. So again, I think Dave's right, it is a little bit of a gray area, but I believe if you're not really changing the total package of the offer, and it actually might save us money over the long run too.
Can I add one?
Dan, yeah,
Sorry, one more point. because
Absolutely.
I think there's definitely concern about the immediate vesting, and that was part of his request. So if you did the bi-weekly through, payroll deduction, and you had immediate vesting checked, you could add a probationary period up to 12 months. So that would be, you're still doing the immediate vesting, but he would have to meet the terms of the probationary period before those dollars would be accessed.
we've already taken probation out of the contract. So I would think that would be changing the contract. Dan, did you want to follow up?
No,
Pete was waiting.
I looked at it as this, we're hiring somebody we're going to offer a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, all right? I don't need it because my wife's got insurance, so I'll take the money instead. So that's the way I looked at it. So you're not changing anything, you're hiring for that purpose of doing it, but you're just changing a couple of things within the plan. So that's the way I looked at it.
Let me ask this, Roger. What if, okay, the motion right now is defined contribution, bi-weekly, and vested after a year, which means 14,000 and something is gonna get dumped in at some point, in this case, at the end of the year.
No,
What?
bi-weekly.
Yeah, I mean, as far as being vested.
Okay.
For right now, it's the whole year. What happens if we send this back and he says, nope, I don't want this, I want it vested now? And the question then becomes, is this our last and final offer again? How is this gonna play out?
Apparently that doesn't
If
make any
there's-
difference.
I suppose it depends on the change.
Well, just a clarifying point on that, if it's bi-weekly withheld, then the first 2-week period, he's vested for that first installment only.
Yeah,
He's not vested for a full year, he's vested at the end of the year.
The full amount.
For the
Just
full
so it's-
He's-
For the
yeah.
full amount.
But I'm
it
pretty sure
only
it was the whole amount.
accumulates each bi-weekly pay
Mm-hmm.
period. So I just wanted to make sure that the board is following that. I guess, again, it's going to depend on what comes back. If he says, no, I'm not taking it, right now, you do not have a rejection.
Nope.
You have an offer that was made and a response saying, would this be included in the offer you made? A request for clarification, essentially, or are you willing to include this because it's not costing anymore? If he comes back and says, no, I want something different.
A car.
I can't, yeah, then that's essentially a rejection of the offer, which you do not really have at this point. He's asked for clarification essentially of what can be included in that first offer. So for that reason, I don't think it needs to be rescinded. Depending what comes back, yeah, that might be something that would require a new offer. We can only speculate what that might include.
this one had his hand up first.
So listening to Tara and Roger, I believe that you're vested, the first payment you're vested, so really you don't need the year in there because you're vested immediately. In answer Treasurer Johnson's question is, the longer that person is here, the more money they'll get. I mean, if they leave after 6 months, they're only gonna get what we put in for 6 months. They're not gonna get the full amount for that year. So if we do it like every other employee, I mean, longevity is gonna put more dollars in for them.
Well, he's just as afraid that he's gonna have a hostile board at some point and get kicked out as we are afraid of him quitting after a week or two. I mean, and in our discussions, we're both in the same spot. We hire somebody, this is a 3-year contract, we expect him to be here. He expects to move up here and stay for at least 3 years. So I mean, you know, we can battle that part of it all day long. He's afraid, so are we, so we gotta get over it at some point. I was just trying to find the original request and see how it was
Well,
worded.
again, my statement says that the longer the person is in that position under that plan, the more money they're gonna accrue. So if they decide to leave after a year, they're gonna only have what we put in for after a year. If they leave after 2 weeks, they're gonna only have what we put in after 2 weeks, so, I mean, the
And
longevity of it is gonna be key.
That could be part of the motion too, to say, to clarify that, to say you're vested as you go along up to a year.
Well,
or however you want to word it.
The defined contribution would be immediate vesting, you know, on our payroll schedule, which is biweekly or whatever we pay monthly. I don't know.
Good way to put it.
Respectfully.
Randy, yes.
Making this way more complicated than it needs to be. You know, the communication wasn't directed to me, but all it's saying is the contract is acceptable with the exception of the DB plan. And if there's no room to negotiate the DB plan, then he's gonna have to reject the offer. So you need to answer the question. Is there room to negotiate? You're not reopening the offer. Is there room to renegotiate? If the answer is no, then you're finished, done. If the answer is yes, then your fallback is simply to say, on the same basis as all other employees, we would agree to put defined contribution in place, not to exceed 13.41% per year, paid biweekly, accrued biweekly. And you're done.
That's what I said, basically.
Well, the Randys agree. John, does that agree with you?
Respectfully, question?
I'll request a roll call vote also.
Okay.
Okay, Clerk Rattari is yes. Trustee Marks?
Yes.
Trustee LaRue?
Yes.
Trustee Wiegand?
No.
Trustee Everson?
Yes.
Treasurer Johnson?
No.
Supervisor Durant?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-2. So the question I have now is, we amended our offer for defined contribution. So what would be our next process in moving forward with that?
So all we would need to do is start the process of, we would get you the adoption paperwork, we would move with you to determine the parameters, the vesting and the employer contribution, and you can put whatever effective date you want on that agreement. You would sign that at, an approved board meeting, and then he will be enrolled in the defined contribution plan.
It's actually in the form of a resolution.
The resolution would be approved by you and the adoption agreement.
It would be effective whatever starting date you established.
Yep, whatever date you want.
Before we start down that,
Let's ask Roger first, just in case he has a
Just
little-
one preliminary thing to any of that is you still have an offer that was made that you never had an acceptance on in totality. So before anything gets done next, the next response is, or the next step is to determine whether your applicant issues an acceptance of that offer, because it's conceivable that he may think things over and reject that, and you're back to square one. So there's nothing to be done until you have that in
I think he
place.
was just saying,
response.
what do we have to do next? just in
Correct.
case. Because I told him I'd call him tonight, and let him know if there was any kind of a
Yep.
motion or not.
But I think the key thing there is understands that it's the 13.41%, not the 15% that he had proposed originally.
Yep. Correct. And not immediately. Dave, you had your hand up, right?
that was my comment.
Ernie?
My question, we're putting forward a defined contribution plan by the board, yet the board has never acted on it to have a defined plan. So we don't have anything in the township. We do not have a defined contribution plan in the township because nothing has come to the board. There's been no resolution by the board to move in that direction. We've talked about it tonight. So we can't, my feeling, we can't even make an offer yet because we don't have it on the books yet. So that's the way we stand. We literally cannot legally make an offer of something we don't have.
Yeah, that's legal. What has to come first, the horse or the cart?
Yeah, you're in the process of doing that. That's what Tara was just saying. She was going to produce the paperwork to come back to you to establish that plan. That's what you're offering to them. The board, I'm presuming, is going to, on a 5-2 vote, accept what Tara submits, at least 5-2.
You're saying it's
You're right.
part of the process?
It's part of the process, yeah. You've now established that you want a defined contribution plan for the individual. MERS is going to develop the paperwork for you to do that. You sign that off, it's in place, which will be before the starting date. You'll adopt that before you establish a starting date for the person to come in.
So the resolution would have to be on the next agenda?
Yes. Correct.
Hang on, Ernie. Go ahead.
Strictly for the legal analysis of it, you have no reason to initiate a defined contribution plan until you have an acceptance, because if your employee rejects the offer, you have an outstanding offer. If that applicant rejects that offer, there is no reason to waste the time, money, and effort, well, not even really money, so to speak, but the time and the effort until you have an accepted offer. I realize that sounds kind of chicken and egg, but that's the order it should happen. Is you should have an acceptance and a need to implement the plan. Otherwise, you're asking MERS to develop a plan on a hypothetical scenario that may never come to fruition.
Ernie?
You answer the question.
Okay. That's why I said the cart or the horse, which,
So, but if you have an offer tonight and an acceptance, then that's the movement to start the paperwork.
And your answer would be to him, it'd be the same what Randy just laid out a minute ago.
so the best process would be to,
All of them?
I'd like to type something out. I can call him and explain it. And I'm guessing the board's gonna wanna see it before I send it out. See if it's gonna be acceptable, unless you want to write something right this minute,
I don't think you and the clerk can put that together from the minutes.
based on the motion.
I wonder why we're in such an all-fired rush about this. Is there any reason we can't take a
Rush?
look at it?
How long have
Want
we
to get
been
it
doing
over
this?
with,
Rush?
one way or another.
This takes all of my time. Well, the motion is gonna be it.
It's it, basically. And Randy had mentioned what the amount will be, based on what, what's there, what's budgeted basically right now for that. And basically, if the offer is accepted, then I guess we have to move forward. If not, then back to square one.
9B,
Yes.
I guess make the ball's in the candidate's court now.
Okay. Do I need something in writing at some point, or not? I can get a verbal
Well, you have to amend the
acceptance?
contract. It says that you have defined contribution instead of defined benefit, or given the option. I guess that would be the only paperwork you'd have to amend, right, Roger, is the original contract that we sent them? Have a provision in there for defined contribution or defined benefit.
I believe so. I'm not thinking of anything else at this point.
Would it have to be spelled out, or can we just put that in and send it to them?
Either
Does it
or.
have to say, based on the bi-monthly payroll deduction with immediate vesting after each payment, up to a year, the amounts, 13.41%?
It can say that. And for posterity's sake and realizing that the board may change over in part, more is better sometimes.
Okay. Just want to know how to proceed. All right, we're good?
right,
All right.
I'll let you know in the morning.
All right. Now we can go to the new 9B. Consider policy waiver for Marquette County Firefighters Association meeting.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
And this is from me. As you will recall, several times in the past, we have hosted the Firefighters Association as well as the Chiefs Association annual meetings at our facility. We have one of the few facilities that are large enough, basically, to accommodate that kind of a gathering. They typically have educational sessions along with the annual meeting, and then afterwards, relax a little bit. We have in the past waived the policy restriction with regard to alcohol on premises. The chief basically and the assistant chief monitor the situation. We have a standby crew that is not participating for response purposes as well as backup. And we are requesting that for this single event that the alcohol on premises policy be waived to allow for this event to occur.
I'll make a motion that we
I'll
approve.
support.
Any questions, comments?
I will just say that it's always well-received. They do like coming to the station, and I will say this too, very few of our firefighters participate in any alcohol, even
Right.
if they can there. It's, last year I made a bunch of sloppy joes and everybody enjoyed the meals, and some guys have a few beers, some guys don't. Doesn't
That's-
matter, they still have fun, and
It's very
nice-
low-key.
Nice to offer it.
It's a very low-key event, and, you know, it really, from the standpoint of mutual aid, it's a serious, significant benefit, basically, from a mutual aid standpoint for everybody to get together and get familiar with each other's equipment and a variety of things. But it's always been very well received. We've never had an issue.
Need anything else? Go ahead.
At our road committee tonight, Chief Shanahan was there, and that subject was brought up, it's off, not part of the meeting, but he said very few people partake in that.
It's true.
They're more to participate in the program, and, these are professional people, so, and he said there's not much of it going on, so.
Well, they all partake, but it's just what they partake in. There's very few that partake in certain refreshments.
I know it, you're bragging up your sloppy joes. So I don't see no problem, and it hasn't been a problem in the past, so I don't think there's been a problem wherever they went, so.
No, the only problem we've ever had is with the pickle.
Pickleball?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Can't call it within the
Opposed?
lines.
Thank you.
I'd have to have something to pay pickleball.
Next up is consider fire rescue and law enforcement millage levies.
Yes, this is mine again. I had raised it with Clerk Rotari, putting together the 2020 budget. We see that both of the millages that were passed, the .6 millage for the fire apparatus replacement and the .4 mill to support the sheriff's services in the township, were rolled back by Headley. So they are no longer .6 or .4. They've been reduced. And I did have a conversation with Clerk Rotari as well as with Attorney Zappa. And we will probably, for not this year, 2020, but for 2021, be asking the board to entertain a question, millage question, to put it back to .6 and .4. So it's information at this point.
Not taking effect this year then?
Well, it will roll back again this year, but, there are some timing issues with regard to getting it on the ballot. We want it to be on a ballot prior to or after May?
You need to have it after May 31st.
After May
You do not
31st.
want it before, because if it's before, it will still be rolled back for, if it
Following
were, for
year.
example, on the ballot for the presidential primary in March, and you can't meet that deadline anymore anyway, but if you did, being before May 31, then it would then be rolled back by Headley in the December 2020 levy anyway. So you want to have your approval of bringing it back up to the full level of assessment and levying after that date, so it will be levied intact
2020.
for the December levy of that year, and then it will continue to be decreased,
Right.
rolled back in each subsequent year. And it's a judgment call in terms of how much that rollback is. Some years, the Headley rollback has been truly minimal, has been very little, and it may not be worth the extra time or the effort or the money to have, especially a special election, but to roll that back. Sometimes, in fact, frequently, on something like a 5-year millage, the municipalities will not conduct an election to bring it back up to the full level of assessment or levying during that 5-year period. They will just renew it and have a separate ballot question at the end of that 5-year period. The statute allows many options on that, but it's seldom that a municipality or a township especially wants to try to renew that every year because of the expense and the minimal amount of how much the rollback is in certain years.
Yep. My only concern with it is that the purpose for doing it for the fire department was to build a fund basically to replace a piece of equipment, and we would not like to see that be reduced. So bring it up for information at this point. Some point after May 31st, we may want to look at it again for possibly a later ballot this year.
Maybe we can have some numbers to how much it rolled back by
Yep,
then.
and what that equates to in actual dollars.
Because myself, if we don't do it this year, I can't see spending money next year on a special election for it.
No.
Your next chance would be 2022
22.
in the midterms to look at it.
Correct.
I'm going to make a note to do this, look at it in June again for the agenda.
We both have it on our calendars.
Senate Bill 431. Oh, sorry, Roger, go ahead.
Just one final point on that is keep in mind that the ballot language has to be put together and approved. So if you were wanting to get it on an August ballot, the deadlines for those things begin in the end of April.
Okay.
So if you want it on the November ballot, you've got a much bigger window. But it's going to be coming sooner than you think if you want it on the August ballot.
Yeah, and I'm not sure because there'll be a lot of millages on each ballot, so I don't know
Right.
which one will be better
Hard to say.
if we do that.
John, go ahead.
Senate Bill 431 on our agenda is an example of the state legislature wanting to take away some of the authority we now have regarding mining and other areas of interest that we now have a great deal of interest in because it protects our community. I move that the staff compose a communication indicating the Township Board's opposition to Senate Bill 431 and authorize the proper signature.
Any support?
I'll support it.
Excuse me. This particular bill has been boxing around for about well over a year. I first saw it on MTA's newsletters last year sometime, and then Powell Township ended up having a big meeting about it last year, and I drove up to listen to them. Some of that was, they've got a lot of gravel mining up there, and some of it was a couple years ago with the roads and the issues they had, and that was their fear too, was losing control. Some of these companies wanted to be able to extract all hours of the night and have whatever noise they wanted and lights, and they wanted different size berms, and it was just, they were panicky about it. And then I didn't hear any more about it for quite a while, and I kind of thought it died. And it came back up on MTA's newsletter again, that it was in the, and as far as I can tell, it's the same amendment. It's not different. I went through it, and it's the same one I had printed a year or two ago. So I talked to Jason about it and asked him if he had any thoughts or was interested in just bringing something to you that said what effect that would have on us. We don't have a lot of mining, other than up on 550 right now with the gravel mining. And we haven't had any problems that I'm aware of, but like John said, it's the issue of losing control. And if we don't stay on top of this stuff that diminishes our authority, we're gonna lose it. We already lost it with the speed limits. Whether we could have had anything to do with changing that, I don't know. But that was my impetus for looking at it. Thoughts? Ernie?
I agree with John going through with this. I think we need to send this to, when I went through, I said the governor, our state rep, our senators, the county, and MTA. So we had to send it to everybody in that, so they know where we're coming from at this point in time.
I know you didn't get a chance to read the memo sample draft that Jason put together. I put it in your mailboxes and I emailed it to you. So you could add it to the packet, hey, Randy?
Andrew could, yeah.
Yeah, okay. just so the public knows. I thought it was a good, in and of itself, it's a good letter. Whether we want to put it in an actual letter form and put everybody's name on it, or maybe a cover letter, I could work that out with him, but one of those things that I bring to you, for discussion. Any other thoughts? Did you want an actual letter, John? Was that your recommendation?
I think
or-
there should be a letter
Okay.
crafted and signed by the proper signatures, because this is one more time when what is in the offering here is to allow the state legislature to once more treat us like a creature, one of their creatures. We need to have some independent input on these things. And you're talking about it going before the full House and Senate, where most of those people don't come from areas like the Upper Peninsula. And they don't have the same interests. And I think we just need to communicate what our concerns are and hope that they do the right thing.
Every community is different, and for some committees or communities, it's not a big deal if somebody's moving rock at midnight. But in a lot of our areas, it's going to be in somebody's backyard, and we need to participate in that decision, if not exclusively, I think. Anything else? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Alongside that, for 431, and going through and reading everything online, there's a House Bill 5305 that's out there that is directing towards that. And it, as they said, it's swinging in favor of local control. So it's something else. They're directing for sand and gravel and that, but also with gas and oil. But it is a companion bill that would be a complete opposite to the Senate Bill 431 in that. So it's something we have to keep address of and see where it's at, because that would be favorable to the townships in that.
It says right in there that local control, and it's got to be health, safety, welfare, and it talks about the best interest of the mining company, and it's a lot more general. It's just very workable. So Jason could, or whoever could reference that bill too. Okay. I think we got through our policy discussions. Any public comment? We lost what little public we had. Any announcements? Nothing from anybody? Randy?
Yeah, we just received our absentee ballots last Monday, and apologize, they're later than usual, but it's out of our control. There'll be they'll start trickling out starting tomorrow, so if you filed an absentee ballot, you should be getting one in the next week or two.
Manager's report. Randy?
Fairly brief this time. Main thing is we've been spending an awful lot of time with snow removal recently. We were in a position to have to go out and rent a larger loader to be able to move some of the snow piles so we could open up clear vision, not only here on our lots, but on some of the key intersections that the fire department relies on, to be able to give them some clear vision at some of the more difficult intersections for responses. So it's been a real busy time doing that. Been trying to keep it off of the roof here as much as possible, but there's still a couple of feet there that need to be taken down. Ice rink we finally have open. We've been able to get it open, and now this week the temperatures are favorable, so hopefully it's going to remain open for a while here yet. We've had an awful time with rain, freezing rain, damaging the surface, and then when the sun does come out, it melts pretty quick. So we've not been able to build very much up, but it is skatable and it is open. We just a little earlier, late last week, after we had put the packets out, we did receive a request from Peninsula Fiber Network for the placement of a fiber optic line to serve the Goodwill store, which would be placed to the north of our access road that we have going to the back of Starbucks. That will be, we'll be doing some more research on that and probably put it on your next agenda for consideration. We're looking at the legal ramifications and some provisions and some safeties that we might want to build into that if the board is inclined to want to approve such an easement. So you'll be seeing that at your next board meeting. That's all that I had.
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
That line is to serve who?
Goodwill. Fiber optic.
But they want to put it on the easement off our property?
Actually, the easement that they're seeking runs between, it's right along our property line between us and Lafayette. It's right along that property line to the north of the road.
But it's on our property?
Yes. Yep, and that's why it's coming back to you as the property owner for consideration at your next meeting once we have some more information.
Pete?
Randy, did we ever do anything, or did the company ever do anything about that line rubbing up against our warming shed over at the ice rink?
No, they didn't. And there may be an accidental cutting here at some point.
Started getting-
Well, it's been, what, how many years, Dave?
3, 4 years?
Yeah.
3 years that we've been waiting for AT&T to move that line. So at some point, I think we just have to notice them, and if they don't do something with it by a fixed date, we will.
Yeah.
Anything else for the manager? Okay, I'm gonna review our motions, Randy?
Okay, the first motion was approve the consent agenda as presented. The second motion was to approve the regular agenda as presented. Third motion was to reorder the agenda, so 9C became 9A, and then we would reorder after that. The fourth motion was to amend our offer to the candidate, manager candidate, to include defined contribution, and the parameters will be spelled out in the contract, what that entails. That was approved 5-2. The fifth motion was to consider the policy waiver for the Marquette County Firefighters Association, and that was approved. Sixth motion was to approve the direct staff to write a letter of non-support for Senate Bill 431 with appropriate signatures, and that was approved.
Okay. Anything for any future agendas then that we need to worry about besides Goodwill? If you think of anything, let me know, or let Randy know. One of the Randys or both. Randy?
At your last meeting, I had a future on here for the MTVA meetings. There were a couple of proposed dates. Has there been one set? Has it been set?
Yeah, we did that at the last meeting.
May
May and
17th,
November?
May 17th and November 7th.
I had that those were proposed dates, but did they agree to those dates?
Those are their dates.
Oh, they're their
That's-
dates.
That's
All right.
what they're requesting,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Any board member comment? Pete?
Lynn, would you look into ordering the MTA little red book? They've got a new one coming out for board
Yeah,
members.
they usually come automatically, don't you,
No,
Randy?
we have to order
Do
them.
we?
Yeah,
I thought they just,
no,
Shipped 'em.
you have to
The ones
order 'em.
from, the ones from MTA, not the ones from the clerk.
Right,
The red ones, yeah.
the little red book.
the little red book.
If there's a revision, yeah, we'll get them out. I haven't
Catherine
seen
just
anything on the
updated
revision
it.
yet.
Yeah, she was on MTA saying that she had updated it.
Yeah,
Oh,
just thought it'd
okay.
be good, and then we get one and use it for this year, and then we can always hand it back to the next person, so.
Okay. Anything else?
I move to adjourn.
Any support? 8:24. Nobody wants to leave.